the major question, which is whether electricity is d'oraita or d'Rabbanan. That is like the question. It's not something we can answer in one class, and we'll see that it's very complicated. The first real question that people had was with regards to lights. Okay, turning on lights on Shabbat and on Yom Tov. And I'm mentioning this because electricity has many different kinds of uses. Okay, it's not just lights. That's just like when we come and we ask what is the halacha regarding electricity on Shabbos, that's not just like a uniform answer. It really depends on the on the situation that we're talking about. Okay, which is kind of like what I was saying, last time, which is that I think that when it comes to any question that you'll find yourself faced with regarding electricity on Shabbat, that question demands an understanding of the specific mechanism that you're faced with. So not all electricity is the same, okay? So what we're going to do today is mainly talk about the halachics of it, okay? Remember, it's the different opinions in the halacha regarding, once again, turning on lights. Only turning on. I'm not talking about turning off, okay? I'm only talking about turning on lights, and on Shabbat specifically. Yom Tov will be, I think, a different time that we're going to talk about that. Now, it's also important to realize, I already said this a different time, is that whenever you either close or open up a circuit, that sometimes there could be like a little spark that comes because of the connection of the two pieces of metal. But that probably is not an issue, okay? The spark in and of itself is probably not an issue. The only issue that we're going to deal with today is the actual turning on, a problem or not a problem. Okay? All right, so let's get right to it. And I'm going to share my screen. And here we are. So, says the Rambam, "Hametich echad miminei matchot kolshu, or mechamim et hamatechet ad sheteaseh gachelet, harei ze toleret mevashel." The Rambam here, in Hilchot Shabbos Perek Tet, says that if you take metal that's hard and you melt it, so now it's liquid, or the opposite, or you take a piece of metal and you heat it up very, very much so that it becomes like a glowing ember, harei ze toladat mevashel. It's cooking. Okay, because according to the Rambam, cooking is not just food. Cooking is any object that was liquid, that was hard and then became soft, or that was soft and then became harder. Okay, all those things are considered bishul according to the Rambam. However, the Rambam in source 2 says something a little bit different. See over here, the Rambam in source 2, Perek Yud Halacha Aleph says, "Amavil kol shehu chayav," meaning if you make any fire whatsoever, you're chayav. "Amechamem et habarzel kedei letzarfo b'mayim," if you heat up metal in order to afterwards put it in the water to steal it, harei ze toleret mav'ir v'chayav. That's mav'ir. So heating up metal could be one of two things. It could be mevashel, which is what the Rambam says in Perek Tet Halacha Vav, and it could be mav'ir. Okay, people would take let's say they make a sword, right? So you would heat it up very much, and then you stick it in the water, and sticking it in the water, basically steals it, and that's part of the process. Anyway, but the point is that heating. I'm sorry.
No, sorry. I just have a question.
Yeah.
The second thing, that if you melt it and you put it in the water, but in what purpose? Just
when you make like a weapon. In the old days when they used to make weapons, or all kinds of things made of metal. Then I don't think they understood the chemistry of it. Okay, but in terms of the chemistry, right? When you heat something up, so the atoms, everything's always in flux, and then you wanna stop that. You wanna make it settle and just gel, So you used to stick it in the water, and then the water cools it off and basically finishes the process.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
So, but the point is that heating up the metal could be mavashel, it could be mav'ir. Okay? Now the Rambam in Yud Bet Aleph says mav'ir. The Ravid there, see the Ravid, Hasagat Ravid, Amar Avraham, Velama lo mishum mevashel. Why is the Rambam here saying mav'ir? Why not mevashbishul? Which is a quote from the Gemara, that says that if you put something into the oven, it becomes softer and then stronger, and that's bishul. Someone who heats up the metal and then puts it into the water, that's not called kibui. That is makebe patish. That is finishing the melacha of making that piece of metal. Shegomeret chisumo. Mikol makom chiyuv en mod tzeruf derabananu. But even that's only a derabanan. So what's the Ravid telling us? The Ravid saying to us, okay, I don't understand why the Rambam is saying mavir. It could be mavashel. What the Rambam is talking about is probably not mavir. It's makebe patish, but it's also makebe patish derabanan, according to the Ravid. So what we have here, okay, if I summarize, just from looking at the Rambam and the Ravid here, right? When it comes to metal that gets hot. So according to the Rambam in Tet Vav, it's bishul. According to the Ravid in Yud Bet Aleph, it's definitely bishul. According to the Rambam in Yud Bet Aleph, it could also be mav'ir. According to the Ravid in Yud Bet Aleph, it could also be makebe patish derabanan. To heat it up and then put it in the water altogether, that whole process. It would be makebe patish der rabbanan. Okay? These are the things that we see over here. It's a basic machloket regarding how to treat the heating of metal. What would be the melacha and what would be the isur? Tov. So far so good? Great. The first one to actually be asked regarding electricity was the Maharsham, okay? Rabbi Shalom HaKohen. So the Maharsham, in his tshuva, and he was the first one. He was the first one to write a tshuva on electricity. So he had no precedent and nothing to go on. There was no one else who had written on it, and it was the first time he had heard of it. It was probably not even something that he'd seen. Okay, he'd probably only heard of it, and he probably didn't even know. Like I remember. I have a book at home called Makor Baruch. It's a book that the Torah Tmima wrote, Baruch Epstein, son of the Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Michal Epstein. And it's his memoirs. He talks about his memories. So Baruch Epstein, who grew up in Novardok, which is a very small town, right? So he talks about one time he went to the big city. Okay, what was the big city? St. Petersburg in Russia, right? That was the big city. So he says one time he went to the big city and he went to this rich guy, okay, like this really rich person. And it was late at night, and he went into the main living room, and he said, suddenly this huge outpouring of light came through the doorway, and it was as if it was the middle of the afternoon. He was describing electricity. Yeah, he had never seen it, and it was like the first time, like middle of the night, and suddenly it's like as bright as day in the room. Yeah, he couldn't believe it. That description was like amazing to me. So, today, we obviously are very used to that fact, and we're not at all surprised. My point was, that it's important to realize people who are writing in the 19th century about electricity, and even at the beginning of the 20th century, if you weren't in the big city, a lot of them didn't see it, didn't experience it, didn't even know what it was, not in a real sense, okay? So the Maharsham here is talking about something that he's never seen, certainly something that he's never really spoken to people about in terms of understanding the physics and the chemistry of it. All right. Michtavo Hegiani. Here's the first truth on electricity ever written. Source 3. Michtavo Hegiani. I got your letter. Since you mentioned that now there's a machine in your city to make electricity in the entire city, in the shul, in the base midrash, and according to the expert that you asked, that they light the fire to create the electricity, and the more people use the electricity, the more fire they have to light. And through that, the electricity is moved through the wires and it gets to all the houses. And when it's time to light the electricity, you connect the wiring, and then suddenly the light comes out. Says the Marsham, I'm not going to lie to you. I have a real doubt in my heart. I wonder if there's even any chiyuv deoraita in turning on and off the electricity. There was no such thing in the Mishkan. An interesting direction on the part of the Marsham, which is, by the way, not followed up by any other Achron, but for the first tshuva, I guess, totally legitimate. He says, maybe, was there electricity in the Mishkan? There wasn't, right? So we're good. Yeah, maybe it's a derabanan, but it's not a deoraita. ואם תמצא לומר דחייב גם בחיי גבנה וכעד דהן מוציאין האש מן האבנים והעפר מן המים בפרק ד' דביצה משום שמוליד האש. And if you'll tell me that actually you're chayav even in this situation, that it is a deoraita, because you're not allowed to en motzi'in et ha'esh, you're not allowed to, take out the fire, from, you're not allowed to create fire on Shabbat, as the Gemara in Beitza says, which we spoke about, mishum shemolid ha'esh, because you're creating fire. Mikol makom, still, yesh lomar deleika mishum havara v'kibui b'chai gavna. Still, you can say that there's no havara v'kibui. It's not considered lighting or turning off in this situation. Sharei eino esh mamash. It's not actual fire. Ve'eino soref hachut habarzel ke'esh didan she'ochelet ve'eina shota. In a second, I'll explain this. V'hu me'ein dugmat esh lemala dichtiv gabei sneh shenitpaleh Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom madua lo yivar sneh. What's he saying? He's saying this is different than regular fire. You're saying this is fire, electricity. A little bit different, isn't it? Because fire, it doesn't just burn, it consumes. Meaning, if you put wood into a flame, the wood is gone after the flame is over. The wood has been completely eaten up, and now there's no more wood. But with electricity, it seems like the fire doesn't actually consume the wire. Yeah, the wire's still there afterwards. He says it's ochelet ve'ina shota, right? The fire burns. It's like the sneh. Yeah, says the Maharsham. It's like the sneh was burning, but it, a sneh nenu ukal. So he says that's the first example of electricity in the world is the sneh, that Moshe Rabbeinu had. Because there's a fire, but there's it doesn't consume. Yeah. So he says, I don't know if that's like our fire. It's not like our fire. So he says, Uvenidon didad, in our case, eineno esh mamash. It's not really fire. Like or ha'ishii hatamun betevachutei habarzel. It's like the nature of fire is somehow embedded in the metal wiring. V'gam inema. Even if we say the shayach be havara, that there is havara in this case. Mikol makom yesh lomar deleka mishum kibui. There's no turning off. You may maybe say, there's a fire, but turning it off is not kibui. It's not putting out the fire. Because you can always put it on again. So putting it out, like turning it off, is not really putting it out. Even if turning it on is putting it on. So that's his feeling. I'm going to summarize in a second. V'yihima, one way or another. I really can't decide because this is all very new to me. I have a lot of doubts. So what's his bottom line? My bottom line is to be mekel. Then didan. In our case, it's for the cover of the shul. And has to do with like hefsed mamon, like if we light everything from before Shabbat and let the lights run through Shabbos, it'll cost a lot of money. So therefore, we can't tell people to do that. It'll cost them an arm and a leg. Back then, electricity cost quite a bit, as you can imagine. Also today, not a small amount, but still less than it was. And so he says, it's a hefsed mamon, and so basically what we have to say is that it's allowed for tzorech mitzvah and hefsed mamon. It's allowed, and we can allow you to. It's a very interesting thing because today no one would allow such a thing, obviously. But the first tshuva And the Maharsham was a very big posek. So the first tshuva I ever written actually was quite lenient on this issue. He wanted to say that it wasn't, so I summarized what the tshuva says. Number one, it's not in the Mishkan. Number two, even if you'll tell me that there is a problem, it's certainly not a deoraita because that doesn't consume. The fire here doesn't consume. Okay? Number three, even if there's a problem with kibui, with havara, there wouldn't be a problem with kibui. It's not considered putting out a fire. So for all those reasons, and here it's Tzorech Shabbos and Kvod Shabbos, and it's for Beit HaKnesset, for the Shul, and etc. I'll allow it, says the Maharsha. Okay? Okay. Unless there are any questions, I will continue. Tov, the next tshuva was written by. Now, Now you can see that in that tshuva, there's absolutely no discussion of the Rambam or the Ravid that we saw. There's no assumption that it's mevashel. There's no assumption that it might be mavir. There's no makibeh patish. Nothing is mentioned. None of those issues are mentioned, even though we'll see them very much mentioned in the next tshuvas, as we'll see. But at the time, there seems to be nothing that's mentioned. The next one discussed is number 4, is the Melamed Lo'il. The Melamed Lo'il is the Radatz Hoffman. I mentioned him already last time. The Melamed Lo'il, Radatz Hoffman, was a very, very important posek in the early 20th century. And he writes, here it was asked, Im yesh chilul Shabbat behadlakat ner shekorin menorah chashmalit or lo? Is there some sort of chilul Shabbos in putting on a lamp on Shabbat? Tshuva. Here's my answer, says the Melamed Lo'il. כבר דיבר בזה בהשכל ודעת התורני המופלג מורנו הרב רבי יוסף הלוי במכתב חודשי שלו שנת 1892 עלי ב'. So he says basically there's an article I know about this. I'm roughly paraphrasing. He says there's an article I know about this by a guy named Rabbi Yosef Halevi. Yeah? And he wrote there נגד חכם אחד, against one of the other rabbis שרצה לומר שבהדלקת ner menorah chashmalit, ein bo mishum avara. So the rabbi that he's quoting, Rabbi Yosef Halevi, wrote against another rabbi because that other rabbi said that there's no problem. Why is there no problem? There's no havara. Why is there no havara? Why is it not fire? Mishum de ha'etzem haboer uptila asuya migachelet pechamim ve'hi mesugeret be'igul zchuchit שנתרוקן מהאוויר שלו, ועושים כל תחבולות אפשריות, כדי שהפתילה לא תהיה נבערת ותעמוד ימים רבים. What did the guy say? It's a very interesting claim, right? So I don't know if you guys know, how does fire work? How does fire burn? What does fire need in order to burn?
Oxygen.
Thank you, Anaya. Oxygen. Woohoo! Correct. Okay, and why don't light bulbs simply blow up when they're used? Because inside the bulb there's no oxygen, right? That was the whole shtick, right? What took Edison so long, right? Thomas Edison. What took him so long to make a light bulb? It's easy, right? I mean, I don't know how to do it, but whatever. It's easy, yeah. So okay, the thing that took him so long was to figure out how to get the air out. Because if you can't get the air out, it explodes. Okay, so once they figured out how to put in some other gas into the bulb and remove the air, right? That was the trick. Okay, and then you can have this thing burning and it doesn't create a fire. So in other words, let me put it to you differently. So in other words, there's no oxygen inside the bulb. If there's no oxygen, there's no fire. Right? Because fire needs oxygen. So what this rabbi was saying was, supposedly it's clear that the bulb is not fire. It's clear that the whatever's going on inside the electric bulb is not fire because there's no oxygen. If it was oxygen, then it couldn't last for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. Okay? That was what that rabbi claimed. Against that rabbi, Rabbi Yosef Halevi, who the Melamed Lo'il is quoting, said, no, that's not true. He tried to say that it's mutter because it's clearly not fire because there's no air in there. Yeah, and that's what they do in order to they want to avoid fire, right? They do everything they can to avoid fire inside the bulb. And it could stay for a long time. So supposedly, clearly, it's not fire. So on that he says, now I'm reading here, והרב מורנו, הרב רבי הלוי, דחה דברים אלו בשתי ידיים, ובטוב טעם. He said, no. Rabbi Yosef Halevi said, no, that's not true. Ubetuv tam, and he said correctly, the havara becholshu, because havara is even kolshu, even a little bit of havara is considered havara. Okay, so what? Veze efshar, it's impossible, said Rabbi Yosef Halevi. Sheyeh makom rek me'avir mikol v'chol. Can't be that there's no air whatsoever. Ume'at avir nish'ar tamid betoch hazchuchit. There's always a little bit, yeah, of air inside the glass. Imken mashu me'aptila niv'eret. Something there does burn. וכמו שהעיד חכם אחד, שהפתילות ההנה יותר טובות, אינן בוערות יותר מט"ו אלף ומכף אלף שעות. As one rabbi said, that even the better wicks, even the better, not wicks, even the better light bulbs, right, don't go more than 15,000 or 20,000 hours. That's a lot of hours, whatever. Doesn't go more than that. גם העידו חכמים, שאף אם מושכין האוויר מקנה על ידי משאבת אוויר, מכל מקום נשאר בו מעט אוויר. He also heard that even if you try to pump out the air, there's always a little bit left. וחוץ מזה יש בפתילה של גחלת חומר בוער באש, אפילו במקום ריק מאוויר. And besides that, there is something that is burning in there, you know, even if there's like no air, there is something that burns in there. So let me just tell you historically, okay? Historically, they're not completely incorrect. Historically, the first light bulbs, they probably couldn't get like mamish all the air out, but they got like 99.9% of the air out. But it's true that because of that, the light bulbs didn't last as long, okay? So, you know, I think by the time that Melamed Lohil was writing, actually they did have light bulbs that were already, you know, completely efficient and air-free. But the idea that there could be a light bulb that has air, even a tiny bit of air, is definitely correct historically, that they couldn't always get everything out. But once again, the light bulbs also, because of that, they caught fire, or they just burned out like really, really quickly, relatively. So, you know, that was fixed over time. By the time that Melamed Lohil is writing, I think that was fixed. And that, you know, there's no reason to think that that was still so. Either way, he says, you know, that there's definitely havara in there.
So are you saying that now we can turn on the light on Shabbos?
No. 1 second. I know people say I'm like this, like really makel rabbi, but you know, like there's a limit even to me. Even I have limits. You know. So 1 second. No, don't turn on lights on Shabbat. Okay, we'll see why, but don't turn lights on Shabbat. Anyway. Sorry, what?
You're saying that we can turn on the light on Shabbos, but we can't make tea?
I said you cannot turn on light on Shabbat. And you also cannot make tea. That's correct, unless you use essence. 100%. Okay? You know, I feel like when I die, this is like the one thing people will know about me, right? It'll be like on my grave, they'll say like, didn't make tea on Shabbos. Like, this is the one thing, right? This is my big thing that everyone knows. Okay, fine, no problem. No, anyway, I'll survive. Yes, let's go on. All right, let's see here. Right, so last paragraph here in the Melamed Lohil, okay? So first of all, he said, okay, you know what, I'll summarize in a second. Yeter mikan, more than this. Efshar da'Torah asra ha'havara mikol v'chol afilu b'makom delei ka'avir. Could be that the Torah asers havara, or asers fire, even if there's no air. Why? Ki ha'havara she'asra Torah hi asiyat ha'esh. Davka v'lo kiyum ha'esh. Right? So what is he saying? He says there's like, you know, like German words here, right? Entzünden and brennen. So brennen is obviously burning. Entzünden is to like light the fire. In other words, Basically, he says maybe the Easter is to make fire and not to keep the fire burning. So if you even started like lighting the electricity, that's considered like it's like a little start over there, yeah, and that counts. That counts. So therefore, even if there's no actual fire, that's fine. It counts, and it's considered that it's that you made the fire, and all good. Okay. And then the last thing he writes, listen carefully because it's important. ואף אם אין כאן שלהבת אלא גחלים או דבר אשר מלובן, נקרא אש. Even if there's no shalhevet, no flame, rather just coals or a piece of metal, davar asher meluban, something that's a hot piece of metal, nikra esh, that's called fire. Ve'im ken en safek, there's no doubt, sheha elektrische galya lampa, meaning that the electric lamp, nikret esh, it's called fire. Ve'im adlikin aptilat shehi melubenet, if you light the light until it becomes really, really hot, אפשר שיש בזה גם כן משום בישול, could be even cooking as well. Okay, so
I'm sorry, can you repeat just if there is no flame? Yes, I don't understand this sentence. If there is no flame, but there is a metal, yeah.
I'll explain.
Okay.
Okay, so the Melamed Lo'il is making 3 points. Okay, point number 1, there's no air. Yeah, on the face of it, there's no air, and so there's no flame. So on that, he says there probably is a little bit of air. Okay, and therefore there must be some flame. That's his first point. Don't tell me there's no air, there's no flame. There's probably a bit of air, and so there's a bit of flame, and that's enough. Number 2, okay, point number 2 that he's making, he's saying you don't have to like keep the fire going. You don't need like a flame. It's enough to start the fire. Okay, and when you turn on the electricity at the beginning, you're starting like a little fire. It's true that it doesn't look like a fire, but that doesn't matter to me. I still believe that making that initial thing is considered esh. That's his second point. And his third point that he's making is that, so what if there's no fire? Let's say there's no fire. No, heating up a piece of metal on Shabbat, is that okay? If it gets so hot that it's burning, like it's giving out light, yeah, so that's at least havara, maybe also bishul. At least havara, maybe also bishul. That already brings us back to the Rambam and the Raavad. That already, he doesn't say that, but that's where he's coming from. That already brings us back to the Rambam and the Raavad. Meaning, do we need an actual flame to say that it's havara? On the face of it, we don't need an actual flame. All we need is a very hot piece of metal. And that we seem to have. So we're good to go. Okay? This tshuva of the Melamed Lo'il, I hope you see, is miles away from the Maharsham, who first spoke about it, right? Because the Maharsham was like, what's the problem? And was willing to be makel for shuls and, etc. And the Melamed Lo'il is absolutely certain there's a deoraita here. Okay? So he's absolutely certain there's a deoraita, and he writes it, it's havara, and maybe even bishul. So those tshuvas are very, very different. And they probably reflect change in times and a better understanding over time of what exactly is going on over there, etc., etc. Okay? Okay, moving on. Here, the Beit Yitzchak, source 5, okay, he says that it's Aser Deoraita, and then he relates to one of the points that the Maharsham makes. He says, Ve'af shelo ne'echal behavara kazo shum etz o shuman, kemo be'avarat dvarim ha'omdim lesrefa. Even though the flame is not consuming the metal wire, okay, even though the flame is not consuming, like it consumes fire or fat or other things, even though that's true, I'm skipping, mikol makom, still, kivan shenir'eh le'einenu shalhevet, since we can see a flame, havim mevashel v'esh, that's considered in terms of Shabbos, or mishum mivashel basar bechalav, if you cooked milk and meat on an electric flame, it would also be considered a flame, and you'd be chayav of basar bechalav, but also be chayav because of Shabbos. And so, in his opinion, the fact that there's no actual flame that is consuming something is irrelevant to the question. Okay? All right. So that's source 5. To bring it home, okay, in source 6, the Levushe Mordechai, who's also from the 20th century already, talks about our discussion, okay, about whether it's a Deoraita or Derabanan, okay, and he brings here the Rambam. I'm pointing out where it is. He brings here the Rambam that it's a mavir, and then he brings the Ravid who says that it's mivashel, okay, and then he goes into a bit of a discussion which is worthwhile seeing, okay. What's the discussion? So if you recall, I brought the Rambam who says that it's both, right? The Rambam says mivashel, but he also says mavir. But you noticed that when he said mavir, he said if someone heats up metal kedei letzarfo b'mayim, in order to afterwards steal it in water. So with mivashel, the Rambam didn't make any condition. He just said it's bishul. But with mavir, he put a condition. He said, yeah, it's mavir if you're doing it kedei letzarfo b'mayim. So why is that needed? Yeah. So he says, I'm reading in the part that I put together over here. The Rambam himself is distinguishing. There, only if you do the tziruf, meaning that you finish the metal, right, by putting it in the water, then ika mishum mavir, then we consider to be mavir. At the beginning, when it's becoming, like when the metal is becoming like a little bit more flexible by putting it in the fire, have mishum mevashel. That's bishul. Okay. So in other words, he brings the Lechem Mishneh, who explains that why is the Rambam saying there are two things, bishul and mavir? The answer is like this: at the beginning, it's bishul. At the beginning, when you heat up metal, so much so that it's becoming more malleable, more flexible, that's bishul. At the end, when you stick it in the water and you finish the whole thing, that's already mavir. At the end, it's mavir. Okay? When you finish it, then and it stays as strong as it was at the beginning, or even stronger, meaning it doesn't change actual forms. It seemed like it was going to change forms from being very, very strong to weak, and then it went back to strong. When you put it in the water, then that's basically mavir. Okay, that's basically what the Lechem Mishneh says. So it's mivashel at the beginning, mavir at the end. Okay, that's the teretz of the Lechem Mishneh regarding the Rambam. We're going to see a different teretz on this later on. But the Levushim Mordechai continues to say, "V'tamati al Gaon milevov shelo evi mizeh meuma." I don't understand why the Gaon of Levov, who he's writing to, didn't bring any of this. V'ine misha'a u'melechet ha'elektrik shebe'elaychtu. He says, regarding using the electricity, le'inyan mav'ir shel ha'matechet, regarding mavir, meaning lighting the metal on, so to speak, on fire, meaning lighting it up. The drata is like the metal wiring, okay? Shehu me'ir al yado, meaning that the filament. The drata is the filament which lights up. Pshita de lo shayach be'melechet mavir. Nevertheless, there's no mavir here. Why not? There en kan tzeruf klal. Ve'im mishum mevashel lo shayach be'esh kazeh. דאם היה חמימות כל כך דמרפא רפוי את החוט הנ"ל שהוא דק מאוד. פשיטא דלא היה מעמיד את עצמו אפילו 2 ימים. In a second I'll explain. דהאנו רואים אפילו אשת של ברזל שהוא בא בחמימות האשת שנעשה גחלת, אם יבעירו בו אפילו יום אחד ימס כמים. וחוץ זה עומד במתכונתו כמו שהוא 1000 שעות אפילו יבעירו בו תמיד בלי הפסק. So the Levushim Mordechai wants to say that it's not a deoraita. Why not? He says, what did I just explain to you? Mevashel is at the beginning, because the metal is becoming softer. And mavir is at the end when you do the tseruf and it becomes harder again. So he says that none of that relates here. None of that has anything to do with what we're doing over here, right? Because he says, is there tseruf here? Are you trying to be mitzaref to strengthen the wire, the filament? No, we're not trying to do that. So there's no tseruf, and there's no mavir. But the cooking at the beginning, we said there's cooking at the beginning. Is it cooking over here? So he said there's no cooking. Why not? Because he says the cooking is only if the metal wiring becomes softer because of the fire. But here, this filament is so small, it's so thin, it's so what's the word I'm looking for? Like wiry, yeah. That if the fire was if there was real fire and it was like causing it to be like to melt, or it's causing it to like become more flexible, it wouldn't hold. It wouldn't succeed to last within the light. So therefore, there's no mavir and there's no mevashel, in his opinion. He says it's clear to him that there's no problem whatsoever. And he says, "Ve'en bo ladun melechet mavir umevashel klal b'chotim uftirei matechet rak mishum molid esh." There's only molid that you can talk about. Okay, in a second I'll explain. V'zeh bevadai eino rak miderabanan, but that's only a derabanan. Kivan she'en kan mishum eze melacha, there's no melacha over here. Okay, and he also continues to say that since it's not consuming anything, and that means that it's not havara deoraita. Okay, so what do we have so far? Okay, we have like this. We have the Maharsham, who's very makel, but he brings reasons that people don't usually accept. We have the Melamed Ohil, who's very machmir, okay, after him, and says it's bishul, it's havara, maybe bishul, okay. We have the Beit Yitzchak, who seems to support that it's a deoraita. We have the Levushe Mordechai, who seems to support that it's a derabanan, okay, and doesn't think that there's biur or mevash, there's mavir or mevashel in these situations, but he is willing to say that it's a derabanan, that it's molid, okay? Molid means what? That you're creating something new on Shabbat. It's not a melacha. It's a derabanan category. It's not a melacha, okay? It's a derabanan category. That's what molid is. So if you're saying molid, that's fine, yeah? But molid is a derabanan category. It is not a deoraita category. That's what we're seeing over here. So according to the Levushe Mordechai, it may be an Isur derabanan of molid, but it's not mevashel and it's not mavir. So once again, we've seen mevashel, we've seen mavir. Yeah, go on, Anaya.
So what is the difference between molid and mavir if it's only a derabanan category?
Mavir is a deoraita category, and molid is a derabanan. So those are very, very big differences.
Yeah, but so what is molid exactly?
Molid means that you're creating something new on Shabbat. It's not a specific melacha. Mavir means that you've built a fire. So if you think that electricity is fire, then you can say havara. But if you think that it's not, you can still say, oh, but they've created something new here with the turning on of the electricity. So at the very least, it's molid, which is a derabanan category.
Okay.
Is that clear?
I think so. Okay.
It's important to realize it's a derabanan category. It's rabbinic. It is not a deoraita. It's not even a strong derabanan, really. And we'll see that some people also don't agree with this molid category. But molid basically says if you've done something that's creative on Shabbat, that you created something out of nothing, then even though I can't figure out like a specific melacha what the problem is, but it's still an Isur derabanan of molid. Okay, great. So we've seen mavir, we've seen mevashel, we've seen a possible makeh bepatish derabanan, we've seen molid. Okay, there's already 4 options about how to categorize the chashmal, and you can add a 5th if you want from the Maharsham, who said it's not in the Mishkan, so there's no big deal. However, we do have the Chazon Ish here, okay, also adds to this discussion, very interestingly. All right, Chazon Ish is a whole shita about boneh. He thinks that turning on electricity is building, okay, but I'm not going to that for right now, and I'm just going to see for a moment some interesting points that he makes over here regarding the possibility that it is mav'ir or mevashel. Okay, so he says, look at the second paragraph here in the Chazon Ish. I'm going to emphasize it. Says the Chazon Ish, v'yesh le'ayen. He says, you say mav'ir mevashel. I have some questions on mav'ir mevashel. Be'ino mechaven. If you're not mechaven, lo letzaref. You don't want to be metzaref to steal the metal. Ve'lo lerakech. You're not trying to make it more flexible, etc., to weaken it. Im yesh bo mishum bishul. Is there a bishul in that situation? Ve'acharei shekashe la'amod al da'at harambam bazeh. The Rambam is difficult to understand because he says mavir and mevashel. It's a bit difficult to know. Ve'dat harayvid de'af be'mechamem letzaref yesh bo mishum mevashel. But the Ravid says yes, there is bishul in the situation. So therefore, le'olam asur lechamem et habarzel mishum mevashel. It's asur to cook, so to speak, to heat up the metal because of bishul. V'nireh dekol shena'asa yad soleret yesh bo mishum bishul. So if it's yad soleret, right? Because what's the category of bishul? Bishul, when you heat food, if it gets to yad soleret to a point where it scalds your hand, then that's bishul. So also over here, kol shena'asa yad soleret yesh bo mishum mevashel. We would say that there's cooking regarding heating up this piece of metal. So he says, min ha'amur nilamad. From this we can learn, right? From here, from this we can learn. The hamadlik nera chashmal b'Shabbat. If you light electricity on Shabbos, yesh bo mishum mechamem et habarzel, sheyesh bo mishum mevashel. There's cooking. However, ela de have psik reisha de lo nichale. But he says, here's an interesting point. Do you want to cook the metal? No, you do not. So it's lo nichale. It's psik reisha. It's definitely going to happen. Psik reisha means it's definitely going to happen. But it's lo nichale, but you don't care for it. You don't care for it to happen or not to happen. Mikol makom asur. Still it's asur. Ve'efshar de'atzichimum tzorech bo le'avarat hazerem mechashiv nichale. Could be that's also considered nichale, that you want it because you need it in order to move the current through. Miukol zei miksat minachut megia liad soleret. All this assuming that it gets to a heat of yad soleret. Okay? Ulinyan mav'ir, and whether it's havara or not, im miktat minachut na'asa gachelet, efshar teyesh bo mishum mavir ledat haram. It could be according to the Rambam, but there's also mavir in this thing if it becomes like a gachelet, as hot as a gachelet, which it does. So, what does the Chazon Ish tell us over here? The Chazon Ish is supporting bishul, basically, and maybe havara. However, it has to reach yad soleret. I mention this because the light bulbs in the time of the Chazon Ish definitely got very hot. But with time and technology, we've tried to make sure that the light bulbs take less electricity from us, we don't have to pay as much for them, etc., etc. And so they actually don't get as hot anymore. The bulbs. You can try in your own house. Okay, yeah, many times you can touch it. The bulbs in my house I can touch. Not even the fluorescent ones, just the regular ones. But they're like those squiggly ones. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, those ones spread lots of light, but they don't get as hot, and they're not yad soleret. You can definitely touch them. So if it depends on yad soleret, according to assuming you say bishul, right, and it depends on yad soleret, then I would say to that there is no issue today with many of the light bulbs, according to the Chazon Ish. At least with regards to mevashel, there certainly is no issue. By the way, I once saw somewhere, I know you'll find this a little bit funny. I mean, I do, but that doesn't mean you will. But why not? Yeah. I don't know if you recall that there's a rule regarding yavesh, right? If something is dry on Shabbat, en bishul achar bishul. If you cooked something from before Shabbat, like a dry chicken, you can put it on a heat source on Shabbat. because en bishul achar bishul. So someone wanted to say that also with regards to bishul, regarding to electricity. In other words, once you turned it on once and it became cooked, en bishul achar bishul. So in other words, you couldn't cook after cooking. So therefore, once you turned it on once, that's it. You're good to go, and you could turn it on again as much as you want, if the reason really is bishul. So that's, I mean, it's an interesting point. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's an interesting point. The truth is that Lamaise, we hold other things as well being problematic with turning on lights on Shabbat. So it doesn't come to that. But if bishul is the only reason you're going with, then yeah, that's a good point actually. Anyway, just putting that out there. So we're almost done for today. Do you have a class after this?
No.
No. Okay, fine. So I'm gonna go till 2, and then we'll end. There's the last part here is the Minchat Shlomo. Okay, who is that's Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Okay, he's the one that we're looking. Shlomo Zalman basically spends the part that I brought here, right? Is basically the one that deals with the Rambam. The Rambam says that Havara is only kedei letzarfo. Is only when you put the sword in the water, right, like we said before, okay? And so because of that, as we saw in the Levushe Mordechai, also in the Chazon Ish, there are discussions about it, because when a person turns on a light on Shabbat, they don't mean to do tzeruf, okay? So therefore, supposedly there's no Isur Doraita in that situation. However, Shlomo Zalman gives a different explanation. Okay, let me just find it for you. One second. So let's see it over here. Okay. Says Shlomo Zalman. Uma shekatav Rambam kedei letzarfo. Regarding what the Rambam wrote, that turning on electricity is only aser kedei letzarfo, if you're doing it in order to steal the metal. Nireh de kavanato le'apukei lelo shum tzorech klal dehav le'kilkul. He says, no, it doesn't mean davka for tzeruf. What it means is to exclude another option. What's the other option we're excluding? Lelo shum tzorech klal. What the Rambam wanted to say was that burning something with no purpose whatsoever is kilkul. It's destructive, not constructive. So therefore, it's a kilkul on Shabbos and wouldn't count. He just mentioned one example, but it's not davka letzaref. Also, it seems since in Perek Tet he writes that heating up metal is toladav mevashel of cooking. Lachen nakat hacha. Therefore, here he writes the kedei letzarfo b'mayim, if it's for stealing it in the water, harei ze toledet mav'ir. That's havara. Ubifrat im nomar de mitkaven lehatich. Only if you're planning on melting. Chashiv rak mevashel velo mav'ir. If you're melting the metal, that's obviously mevashel and not havara. Sha'arambam sover de bechavana talya milta. The whole thing depends on your kavana. Someone who's heating up a piece of metal for cooking, for heat, for light, something that's no worse than kedei letzarfo. It should be the same thing, and it should be just as aser, without a doubt. So he writes, it seems clear to me, the leinian hadlakat chashmal, regarding lighting electricity. Regarding lighting electricity, since the wire, right, the filament gets very, very hot, until it gets so bright that it spreads the light. So clearly, that's considered as if you did something significant on Shabbat, and you're chayav for that action. Mishum avir. שיגיע לדרגת חום שראוי לצירוף, as long as it gets to the amount of heat that you need for tzeruf. So in other words, he says that you can explain the Rambam as mentioning the example of tzeruf because he's trying to say how hot it should get. So if it's enough to tzaref metal, that shows that it's hot enough and that's where the issue is. So bottom line over here, he says, and in the next part he also explains that even the Ravid agrees, with this understanding regarding electricity. So therefore he says that. Sorry, I'm just going to get out of the share. So basically, what the Rosh Hashanah Auerbach says is that the Easter here is an Easter of Mav'ir. Bottom line. Okay. So if someone asks you with regards to lights on Shabbat, right, and the lights get hot, the lights are the kind of lights that get really hot, okay, as lights of old did, then that is Mav'ir and probably also Mevashel. And you can also add Molid, and if you feel like sticking in a Makeh Bepatish, go right ahead, knock yourself out, okay? But classically, Mav'ir, yes. Hav'ara, that's the classic answer to the question, what is the Isser with regards to lights on Shabbat? The Isser is Hav'ara. But as you can see, there are a lot of other peripheral issues which also should be taken into account, which are definitely relevant. And we're going to see more possibilities later on in the next class. But for now, I would say that's enough. So that's in terms of Hav'ara and Bishul and the basics. We're going to see a lot of the other stuff in the coming classes. Okay.
Can you just repeat
day.
Avara?
Shavua tov. Sorry?
Can you just repeat the definition of Avara?
Hav'ara is lighting a fire, but in this case, it's heating up metal to a very significant heat, so much so that you can either, it's yatzoledet for mevashel, or enough to letzarfo, that in other situations you could even use, like you use it, you could even, it's a kind of heat that you could use to heat up metal in order to steal it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.